new book, Mayday, The Decline of American Naval Supremacy. Seth, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Seth, tell our listeners your time you served in the Navy, and then how you when you went to be U.S. Deputy Undersecretary of the Navy.
Well, they were more or less at the same time. After I became a civilian official in the Secretariat, it seemed to me as though the right thing to do was to work in uniform as well. So I accepted a reserve commission, and although I continued it for years, continued my commission for years after I left the civilian job, it was in all a very worthwhile experience, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to have been able to serve.
What does it mean to be U.S. Deputy Undersecretary of the Navy? What level is that?
Well, at the time, there was a secretary, an undersecretary, one undersecretary, and one deputy undersecretary, and my portfolio was for policy. So I was involved in issues as diverse as reform legislation that Congress was trying to pass, to being the responsible official within the Secretariat for special operations, to basing issues, to maritime strategy, to naval education, sort of issues that either overlapped the assistant secretary, the existing assistant secretaries, or else fell between the cracks in the way the organization was set up at the time.
So what's wrong with the Navy?
Well,
that's what your book is called. Your book is called Mayday.
I mean, the Navy has the problems of any organization. That's normal for an organization. But the large issue facing the Navy today, which has not been addressed, is what is the nation's maritime strategy? What will it be in the future? And once that decision is reached, where will the money come to pay for it? Those are the two large issues facing the Navy. And the third one, which is, I would say, equally important, is the way that the Navy designs and builds its ships, and how it could be done more economically. But those issues are, they come in after more fundamental decisions have been taken, such as what kind of fleet the Navy wants to build, because what really should drive that is what sort of strategy, maritime strategy, is most suited for the nation's security.
Seth, your book is obviously a warning. It's called Mayday. That's so if you have never been in the military like myself, you watch enough movies to know that's a bad sign when someone's yelling Mayday. And you argue in your book that the U.S. is cutting the military budget, shrinking our Navy. Now, this has happened before. I remember being old enough to remember the Jimmy Carter years, President Jimmy Carter, when he cut the Navy as well. And, of course, President Reagan got lots of criticism for building that Navy back up. So what is there a difference between this particular period of cutting back on the Navy? The Soviet Union was certainly a threat. What is different about it? Is this something that can be reversed? Help us understand why this is a Mayday signal.
Well, the issue here goes back to the end of the Cold War. This is not simply this administration, although this administration has done more than any of its predecessors since the end of the Cold War to reduce the military. The problem here is that when President Reagan left office, the fleet was approaching 600 ships. And today, the Navy has fewer than 286 ships. It's about
What?
between 280 and 285 ships, depending upon how you count.
Wait a minute. You telling me we're down 350 ships since Reagan was president?
We have, the Navy today has about 284, 285 ships.
Is that surface ships, or does that include submarines?
That's everything.
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 Everything in the Navy.
Combat ships
Combat.
and logistics ships. It doesn't include tugboats, for example.
Now, I guess some people.
And the real. Let me just finish
Yes, please.
that thought, because to answer your question, the real issue is not really what's happening today. It's what's going to happen in the future, and whether the Navy will be able to reach its goal of 306 ships in the foreseeable future. And that number, the 306 number, has declined by 7 ships from what it had been for the past 7 years. So what we're looking at in the future is that the goals that the Navy sets for itself, or is required to set for itself, are being reduced, and the money that's available to reach those goals simply isn't there, even if you don't take into account sequestration and the amount of money that the Obama administration has already cut from the military, which combined equal about $1 trillion.
You know, and by the way, we're talking with Seth Cropsey, former Deputy Undersecretary of the Navy. He's written a book called Mayday, The Decline of American Naval Supremacy. My dad, who's now, he's been retired for years, but worked for Motorola and Raytheon with military contracts, worked on the Patriot missile system and the MX missile. And I remember having a conversation with him, and he's in his 80s now, and he said, you know, during World War II, you needed more tanks. You just converted, you know, a couple of automobile factories and you started pumping out tanks. He said, the research and development phase of new weapons systems takes so long that it's very difficult to play catch up with your enemies. You mean, in other words, you just can't decide, well, we're going to put out a new and quieter submarine that can match up to new Chinese submarines. And so this is part of the process that I think a lot of people don't understand. Not that I have a great understanding of it, but it takes a long time to develop the technology that goes into modern warfare. So when you say it's not just simply the number of ships, it's the strategy. I mean, if you cut back on research and development, you put yourself behind the 8 ball with your potential enemies, don't you?
Yes, and your dad's right. Let me just give you a very small anecdote that illustrates your father's wisdom. When in the Bush administration, the first administration, George H.W. Bush, the Navy was trying to figure out how to replace an old mini submarine, midget submarine that's used to carry SEALs. That was in 1988, 89, 90. They're still trying to figure out how to do it.
Talking to Seth
So that's just a little boat.
But does it now? Your subtitle is The Decline of American Naval Supremacy. So I thought so that indicates that at one time, and maybe for a long time, the United States Navy ruled the seas, so to speak, around the globe. Our presence, in our power, in our our
technology,
fleet and the technology and everything. But now you're saying that's on the decline and has been on the decline for what, 20 years, 10 years? How long?
Yeah, no, over 20 years.
Over 20 years. So it's happened, different Congresses, different presidents, both parties. Now, so who is rising that may challenge our supremacy or may Who in the world is in
Well,
that position?
look, the Chinese Navy is the biggest single rising naval power in the world today. The Chinese military has enjoyed double-digit increases in their military spending for more than the past 2 decades running. So they're designing and buying and putting to sea several classes of attack boats, submarines, of nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines. They put their first aircraft carrier to sea this year. They have a huge stockpile of missiles on the mainland and others that are carried by naval aircraft. They're building a ballistic missile system that is intended to target our aircraft carriers at sea underway at a distance of 1,200 miles. So they're not yet ready to take us on, but if we keep dwindling and they keep increasing, things are not going to go well in the future. The Russians are rebuilding their Pacific Fleet. Our Sixth Fleet, which was once our Mediterranean fleet, consists essentially of a command ship based in Italy and a couple of ballistic missile defense destroyers that wander about the Mediterranean. We used to have 2 aircraft carrier battle groups in the Mediterranean. The Russians have 12 ships in the Mediterranean. The Iranians have deployed ships to the Mediterranean. The Chinese have deployed ships to the Mediterranean. So none of this happens overnight. It takes years to happen, and the book is a warning about what happens if those years pass and we do nothing.
The book is called Mayday. It's written by our guest, Seth Cropsey. Is that how you pronounce your name, Seth?
Cropsey, right.
Cropsey. And he is a former U.S. Deputy Undersecretary of the Navy. His book is a warning about the state of American naval forces around the world, how we've been in decline for, Seth, the average American doesn't have a clue on this, and quite frankly, it's not our responsibility. It's the responsibility of the commander-in-chief, and it's the responsibility of the Congress and of the Navy, leaders.
Yes, but we have a responsibility to elect those people.
Yeah, I know, but we don't know what's going on. How do we, what I'm saying,
Well,
it's that
if
somebody
you read
like
the book,
you.
then you will.
I know, unless somebody like you comes along and warns us. I guess what I'm saying is, yes, it is our responsibility at the base level of voting, but when you vote for people, you vote for them to know more than you know. So because that's the whole purpose we have representative government,
Right.
for those people to be responsible. Otherwise, we'd vote on everything that comes up every day. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So I guess what I'm saying is, how has this happened? Because I can't believe that these administrations would pass, both Democrat and Republican, and we would see the decline of American naval supremacy, and these people not know what's going on, and not want our leaders here in America. With that, I can't imagine, I guess what I'm saying, them intentionally wanting to say, hey, all right, how can we bring down our naval presence around the world so that we're, you know what I'm saying, so we're not very efficient or effective?
Sure. Well, look, 2 points. The first is that we've been at war in one form or another on land since Desert Storm, right?
Right.
Yes.
So there's been Desert Storm and Shield and Bosnia and Kosovo, and then the second Gulf War and Afghanistan and Iraq, and these are all land wars, and the war against terrorism while it existed. And these have all occupied people's attention and budgets and publicity, and that's what we know about.